What if Civil War never ended? Welcome to the Complete Story Series, where I take trade paperbacks and single issues, and I break them down into digestible bites to help you understand. Then I read it dramatically back to you. All alterations to the panels, text, and images are to prevent copyright problems, and all art is owned by its respective companies. 6 years ago, there was a time when heroes fought each other for what they believed in. They fought over a law, the Superhero Registration Act. There was a group of inexperienced heroes who tried to take down a group of bad guys, but they didn't stand a chance. And because of it, 600 people died. So, the law was made. If you wanted to be a superhero, you had to register and take off your mask. Only after that can you be a hero. Tony Stark was at the front of this new law. He wanted to make sure that there was order, but Steve Rogers didn't see it that way. He felt that this was a violation of the principles of liberty on which the nation was founded on. And so, they fought in a little event known as Civil War. Eventually, Steve Rogers led a charge on the prison that Iron Man had created to release his allies. During the charge, T'Challa and Dagger were going through the prison security systems until T'Challa found something. The entire prison was rigged with a self-destruct, and it was armed. T'Challa tells Dagger to find Cloak. He can teleport everyone away, and T'Challa will stay back to buy them some time. But in the middle of the prison, everyone is fighting, and Commander Hill informs Iron Man that they've activated the self-destruct, so Tony tells everyone to get to Cloak. It didn't matter whose side you were on, everyone had to get away. They all began getting teleported back to Earth, and everyone began to fall into the city. Cloak wasn't fast enough. He wasn't able to close the portal in time. Sure, a good number of the superheroes made it through the portal, but so did the resulting explosion. Many heroes died, and 15 million civilians died in that explosion as well. After that, things got out of control. It didn't seem like either Cap or Iron Man were in charge any longer, and during the chaos, the villains tried to rise up. Then there was the Osborn coup. That failed, and after all of that, there are now two sides to the nation. The Iron, led by Tony in the East, and the Blue, led by Steve in the West. Whose side are you on? That was 6 years ago, but now with the nation divided, there is someone who believes that there can be peace. There can be reunification. Miriam Sharp. She stays on the bridge that was built to connect the two nations, and she's invited both Tony and Steve in hopes to reach a peace, and they both agree to arrive. Miriam knows that in order to bring reunification, it won't be simple, so she decides to talk about the things that each side needs and to start there. Tony needs space for his population. They've been growing, and they have nowhere else to go. Where Steve has space, but he lacks the resources that Tony has. They go back and forth for a second, when suddenly, a bullet comes from the Blue, hitting Miriam Sharp in the chest. Steve radios into his man, Peter Parker, who is finally getting to see MJ and his child after all of these years, and he tells Peter to find that shooter. Expanding the wings that he acquired from Falcon, Peter takes off. He doesn't find the shooter, but he does find the rifle about 2.5 miles out. Steve tells Tony that the rifle that was found is a high-caliber rifle, and the shot would take several seconds to travel. Miriam wasn't standing in the spot that the shot was fired. As they were talking, she moved into range, meaning the shot wasn't meant for her, it was meant for Steve. And there's only one person that can make that kind of a shot, Bullseye, and he works under Tony. Tony tries to tell Steve that Bullseye doesn't work for him, but Steve tells Tony goodbye, and he leaves. Once outside, Spider-Man reaches for the rifle for them to inspect, but as they go, Steve tells Spider-Man Tony will never let this war end, so they're gonna end it for him. Later, when Tony returns to the Iron, he sends out a drone to scout where the shooter was. He was able to track the route down that the shooter took after the shot, but during the drone's flight, kind of ran into some storms. Caused by Storm. Storm calls down her lightning and destroys the drone, and then she takes it back to Steel Town so that Colossus can have a look at it. They're not sure why Tony would send out a drone, so Colossus decides to punch his way through it and pull out its brain. Colossus then tells Storm to bring it over to Steve to get analyzed. A little while after this, Tony sits in his command room with Jennifer looking at a timeline. Tony explains all of the events and possible events that have led up to the death of Miriam. As Tony goes on, Jennifer finally begins to see what he is starting to see. We're being played. Back over in the laboratory of Hank McCoy, Steve, Hank, and Peter all stand around a contained Sandman, currently as a pile of sand. Flint was taken in for killing travelers and taking their things. Normally, there would be a punishment, but there has been another option. Flint allows Hank to test his experiment in exchange for walking. Steve looks down at Flint in his container and he tells him, "Are you sure about this? There's no going back." Flint tells him that he's made his choices. He has no regrets, but Steve couldn't say the same. Steve turns to Hank and he tells him to do it. Flint starts to scream out in pain, but during this, he starts to take on a human form, his actual human form. Hank tells everyone that Project Bell Curve was a success. Project Bell Curve can strip the powers of any empowered individual permanently, but there's one slight problem: the resources to run it. They just used all of them in that last test. So, Cap and Hank decide to send Peter into the Iron to get more. But during this, Tony sits with Jennifer talking about how close they are to finally figuring out what's going on. The drone that Storm shot down was headed off to Steeltown, so we need someone to go into Steeltown and look. This will probably not be a job for She-Hulk. This will be a job for Jennifer Walters. As Peter and his team arrive in the Iron, he explains that they don't need to know what they're doing here. It's on a need-to-know basis. They just need to know that once they hit all 3 objectives, Black Panther can restore his family's lineage, Venom can get his closure, and Elektra can kill the man who killed Daredevil. And Peter will finally get his family back. Peter's assault did not start out well, as the Sentinel-sized Iron Man drones roast Elektra before they can even get inside. Peter, Venom, and Black Panther do manage to get inside, but while this is going on, She-Hulk enters Steeltown, getting past Professor Xavier's scan. She thinks that no one will recognize her as Jennifer, but she's wrong. Back over with Peter, Venom, and Black Panther, they've managed to sneak into the building that they were after, and they take out some of the robot guards. That's when Peter tells the other 2 that it will keep throwing everything that it has at them, so they need to hurry. Black Panther asks what it is, and Peter tells him, King Oct. Kingpin captured Doc Ock and took his arms. Once Kingpin put them on himself, they shocked his brain and killed him, but the arms still need a host to function. Peter tells them to follow his lead, but then one of King Ock's arms comes crashing through the glass, grabbing Peter. Back in Steeltown, Jennifer climbs a building about to catch Bullseye, but before she can move in, Speedball appears. Speedball explains that he's not Speedball anymore. Now his name is Officer Baldwin of the Punishers. Just as he tells Jennifer that she's coming with him, she transforms back into She-Hulk. Speedball tells her that the Punishers are moving in. Just give up before she gets hurt. But she's the She-Hulk. It's the other guys who get hurt normally. Jennifer throws him into the other buildings, bouncing off the walls until he lands. Speedball looks back up and reports that yes, that is in fact She-Hulk. The person on the other line tells him to stay back and let the big guns handle this. Be my guest. Back over with Spider-Man, King Oct continues beating down Peter and Black Panther until Venom climbs down from behind and using a bow that he made out of his symbiote, he fires Elektra's weapon into King Oct's head, killing him. Black Panther asks if they're done yet, and Peter tells them, yeah, we got what we came here for. Let's get the hell out of here. Back over in Steeltown, Jennifer tries to escape by running on the rooftops. She tries to explain to Tony that while she did find Bullseye, there's something else. But before she could finish, she was hit from behind by a giant explosion. The Punishers move into where Jennifer was hit, but they can't find her body. As Jennifer begins to wake up, she's in her human form, and when she looks up, she can't believe what she's looking at. Someone who died 6 years ago. And T'Challa tells her, correct, he is dead. But yet, here he is. Believe whatever you want, Jennifer. It won't change the truth. Over in the blue, Hank tells Steve that everything is ready. Bell Curve is ready for deployment now that Peter's mission was a success. Steve thanks him, and then Steve explains to Peter that where they stand now, they will be out of fuel in 6 months, food in 8 months. So Peter asks what he can do to help. Bring me my shield. Over in the Iron, Tony starts to suit up to go look for Jennifer, and he flies over towards the blue, and that's when he sees that Jennifer's last signal came from down in the Divide, the space between the Iron and the blue. Tony thinks to himself that there shouldn't be anything down there, so he has to hurry. He reaches the bottom and he starts to scan and try and find Jennifer, but that's when things start to blast through the walls and missiles begin to fly over at him. But back above, Steve is gathering all of his forces and they're making a move on the Iron. Steve stands on a tank and he radios all of his men. He begins to tell his men how he was humbled that they elected him in their darkest hour, and they have fought and died for their nation. Miriam built the bridge connecting the two nations as a symbol of peace, but the Iron just wanted to take their land, their children's land. Steve looks down at Peter and he tells him to do it. And with the click of a button, Miriam's bridge explodes. Steve tells him that there's no going back. Their children only know of peace through fairy tales. Today, this war ends. Back down on the Divide, T'Challa's men have captured Tony and they begin to drag him to T'Challa. Hello, T'Challa. Nice to see you. Thought you were dead. Also, screw you! T'Challa tells Tony that originally he wanted to claim this land, which is why he pitted both Steve and Tony to fight each other. And once they are done fighting, he will have his own men come in and sweep up anyone who's left. T'Challa begins to shapeshift into Steve and then Tony, and goes on to tell him that replacing him will be easier since he's gone trying to rescue Jennifer. Tony tells him that there's no way that he could be Black Panther. He was one of the smartest people that Tony has ever met. He would know better than keep Tony alive. T'Challa tells him that he can't do anything. They've destroyed his suit. He has no weapons. He's just a man. Am I? Tony begins to stand up and light begins to shine from his hand. For reasons that will shortly become obvious, I don't advertise everything that I've invented. For example, years ago I cloned a thunder god. Not a great idea, but I did keep the tech. Tony then shoots lightning, blasting T'Challa and the cage holding Jennifer. When Tony looks down to see what was T'Challa, he notices a Skrull. My money was on Mystique. Skrull soldiers come in asking where their Empress is. Does she need assisting? And that's when they notice Tony standing there. That's just great. The soldiers begin to surround Tony, and that's when he starts to fight them off. But then Jennifer joins the fight, and they quickly defeat all of the Skrulls. Tony asks where the Empress went, and Jennifer tells him that she left. Tony tells her that they need to find her, because if she shapeshifts into anyone, then they're gonna lose her. But back up above, the battle has begun, and Steve is trying to get everything into position for his new bomb. He needs to get the attention of all of the heavy hitters, but when Peter asks how he's going to be doing that, Steve tells Peter that he has an idea, and then he tells the driver to move. Steve begins to drive into the middle of the fight and shout to everyone, "What are you waiting for? I'm right here." As Steve continues to fight off all of the heroes closing in on him, Tony calls down another suit to come and get him out of the divide. But as Tony begins to fly into the battle, Steve and a Hulk notice him. Steve tells Hulk to throw him, and he asks if he's sure, and Steve tells him right now. Hulk agrees, and he grabs a hold of Steve, launching him upwards. Steve holds out his shield, and he lands right into Tony, and the two of them bounce onto one of Tony's flying carriers. The workers run over asking Tony if he needs any help, and Tony tells them no, he's got this. Go get Colonel Barnes and Emma Frost. But after Tony is done talking, Steve comes running in with his shield, hitting Tony in the neck. As Tony falls, Steve runs in to push his thumbs into Tony's eyes. Tony tries to tell him that they need to talk, but they just continue fighting. Tony finally knocks Steve down onto a fighter jet, and as Tony stands there, Emma Frost and Bucky come running up. Emma asks if Tony has finally captured the Blues leader, and Tony tells her that he isn't the enemy. Tony then points his hand to Bucky. He is. When Bucky tries to tell Tony to calm down, Tony blasts him in the chest, and then Tony explains that it was the Skrulls who were making sure the war continued. Steve really doesn't believe him though, and that's why Tony brought Emma. Tony tells her to show Steve what he's seen, and then Steve sees everything that's been happening, and how the Empress was behind all of this. Steve tells Tony that they can't just call a ceasefire. It will just take too long. But that's when he mentions his bomb. The bomb will remove all secondary abilities, locking the Skrulls into their alien form. Tony says, "That's great, but where is it?" Steve points down, somewhere down there, in the middle of your troops. Steve then radios to the Hulk, and he tells him to throw the bomb into the divide. The Hulk asks him if he's sure, and then Steve tells him, "Logan, just do it already!" So, Logan, as the Hulk, throws it in. As Steve and Tony look down, Steve presses the button, but nothing happens. Was something supposed to happen? Tony asks. And Steve tells Tony that the signal might be jammed due to all of the fighting, so he'll just have to go down there and blow it up himself. Tony looks at him. Guess we will. Steve and Tony begin to fly down, and Steve notices that it's been damaged between the Hulk ripping it free and then it crashing down here. Steve asks if Tony can fix it, which he can, just the bomb part. When Tony goes to touch the bomb, the Skrulls begin to fire down on both of them, and Tony tells Steve to hold them off as long as he can. So Steve fights as the Skrulls begin to overwhelm him. Steve tells Tony to tell everyone psychically everything. They need to know the truth about all of this. So Emma begins to broadcast to everyone, the people fighting, the people across the world, that this whole war has been nothing but a lie. Steve and Tony were pawns of the Skrulls for years. Everyone below begins to stop fighting, and they look up at what Emma has to say. And then down below in the divide, the Skrulls begin to corner Steve and Tony. Then all of the heroes begin to fly down, trying to reach Steve and Tony. Tony looks up and he says, "Look at them all." Steve then lowers his head and he tells Tony, "Beautiful. Heroes. Every damn one." Then, click. The bomb detonates, and an explosion of blue covers everyone. Everyone begins to fall from the sky. Jennifer was still fighting with the Empress below, so she's also affected by the blast. And the Empress asks Jennifer, "Why lose your powers? You are only human now." But before she could finish, Jennifer knocks her out. Yep. 2 months pass, and Peter and Jennifer meet on the bridge that is connecting the two nations. Peter is helping lead the blue, while Jennifer leads the iron. The iron has lifted the embargoes on the blue, and now they are starting to regain their strength. And the iron has sent over settlers to the blue so that they can expand. Everything seems to be going well for everyone, so they will meet back here again in a week. But before Peter goes, Jennifer asks one last question. When Steve and Tony were down there setting off the bomb, do you think they knew that they were taking everyone's powers away? I don't know, but I'll tell you one thing, I don't want to fight about it. And that is the what if story of what if the Civil War never ended. Now, this was a trade paperback that came out during the Secret Wars, and this apparently happened in the Battle World. Now, I hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you did enjoy it, let's chat about it on Twitter @Comicstorian and on Instagram @Comicstorian. Don't forget, we also have a gaming channel where we bring you gaming comic books every Friday, and you can find the link to that down below. It's Eligible Monster. I'll see you next time right here.